Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are about to enter week 6. You can also call it the most boring week of the high school football season because it is the week where we have the least amount of games. A lot of teams are on byes, getting ready for everybody to be in district play starting next week. We are about to get down to it when everybody is playing a game of significant consequence. We do have a handful of games that are going on this week that are all district contests, and everybody else jumps into the fray full bore next week. So we will do what we always do. There will be a lot of recap talking about week 5 and teams finishing out their non-district schedules. And then we will talk about the 5 games that we have on the schedule for sure this week. There may be a 6th game, but unfortunately, as we're taping this podcast, we don't know for sure. We will touch on that as we work our way down the classifications. But we will stay tried and true to our formula here on the All-Texomaland podcast, and we will start at the top. And we will talk about a team that had a bye last week, but is getting ready for a game this week. And that, of course, is the Sherman Bearcats. They jumped back into District 6-5A Division One action with a Thursday night game, 7 o'clock at Toyota Stadium. After going to the old barn, Kuykendall Stadium, formerly Memorial Stadium, they get to go play where FC Dallas plays, get a little bit of an upgrade as they take on the Frisco Raccoons. Sherman is 2-2 and 1-1 in district play after their win against Lebanon Trail going into their bye, and Frisco is 4-1. They are 3-0 in district play after they beat Lebanon Trail last week, 36-13. So if you want to play that game of the score comparison, you have Sherman, who 2 weeks ago beat Lebanon Trail 44-20, and you have a Frisco team that just beat them 36-13 last week. Of course, this was a game last year in Bearcat Stadium that was not close, as Frisco won 52-9. And so the early standings obviously make this. You can say all the games are key games, but this makes up one of the key games this week because Frisco is one of just 2 teams in the 6-5A1 standings that is still undefeated. They are, like you said, 3-0. Lone Star is 2-0 because they had the bye. They had a bye as well through one of the first couple weeks. And then Frisco Reedy and Frisco Heritage are both 2-1. And then Sherman right now by itself in 5th place at 1-1, pending the outcome of all the games that are going to happen this week. And pretty much most of what we saw last week has set this up for an interesting matchup because I think there were some teams that people thought would still be undefeated in this district. Some of the outcomes, we've talked about it, have already flipped from last year. And some people have suffered losses against teams that they beat last year. Sherman, unfortunately for them, is on the same track. They were 1-1 at this point last year, and coming into a stretch of playing the people that are either are immediately around them or are coming up. And Frisco is one of them. We don't want to look too far ahead. But you start looking at who plays who, and next week you're talking about playing Frisco Heritage, one of those teams that's right in front of Sherman currently, and they are coming up here, which makes it even more important to get that win to defend your home turf, and they're going to. They're playing Frisco Lebanon Trail this week, so you assume that they're probably gonna go to 3-1, and you've got to keep pace if you want to stay in the mix for a playoff spot. So you mentioned when we did the recap last week, Sherman bounced back in a big way from that opening loss in district against Centennial, a game that they had in a good spot going into the fourth quarter, and it spiraled and got away from them, and they bounced back and they got a win they had to have. You really can't drop to 0-2 in this district and want to stay in the mix, because right now, Lebanon Trail is 0-2, and they're in 8th place out of 9 teams, because it's such a big district, and if you fall off a decent pace, you're in trouble to try to make that up along the way. So that was good to see from Sherman. Really good second half. Outscoring Lebanon Trail 27-0 when they were trailing in a close game at halftime. That's what you wanted to see from the Bearcats. Now you're going on the road against the first place team. What can you do against a team that, like I said, is off to a really good start, 4-1? Their one loss is by a point, so they could easily be sitting here at 5-0. And obviously they know they can look at the standings too, and they see where they're at, and they've already got a good healthy lead on some teams to try to get a playoff spot, let alone they're setting the pace atop the district standings. So it's going to be interesting to see how things work. And I guess another interesting part of this matchup is Frisco has their bye next week, so they're maybe the kids aren't thinking this way, but obviously the coaches are saying, hey, we want to go into our bye as good a note as we can at 4-0. We know by the time we get back to action, which is going to be against Frisco Heritage coming out, Sherman and Frisco basically follows Sherman's schedule, except they opened with Liberty and Sherman ends with Liberty. But everybody that Sherman plays, Frisco plays the following week. So after Sherman plays Heritage next week, Frisco will play Heritage the week after that, and then all the way through the rest of the schedule till the last week when Sherman will finally get to Liberty, and Frisco has Wakeland. So it's going to be interesting. I think the bye was at a good time. I don't know if when you're not splitting 5-5, it can be interesting to see how you handle when you have a bye. And I think that was a good thing. I know a lot of people say, well, you win, you want to keep that momentum going. But I think you'll see a team get healthy, continue to boost the confidence, spend 2 weeks working on some things that I'm sure they know that they're going to need going into the final couple weeks. But if they can do a lot of what they did in the first 2 games, I would say, they've played 8 district quarters. They had 7 pretty good ones, and they had 1 really bad one. And so I think that's a good sign for them. And you're going against a team that you have to plan to deal with them because of the offense that they run. Even though their offensive coordinator Blake Yancey's now at Whitewright as the head coach, they are still sticking with the principles of a run heavy wing tee offense. They do throw it more probably than a traditional wing tee offensive scheme would dictate, but a lot of what they do is on the ground, and so it's one of those offenses that a lot of people don't run it, and to have the extra time, we'll see if that pays off for Sherman, and it's going to be interesting too. Obviously, like we said, Frisco played last week. They played on a Friday. They're coming around to play on a Thursday. Sherman could go through a normal. They're going to be rested going into a game that is earlier than normal based on a regular schedule, and that might be something they might be able to use to their advantage as well, because last year it was on a Friday, And so, Frisco had a normal routine coming into the game. This time, obviously, they have the one less day. That's going to change things. It makes you wonder, depending on if they had any injuries or had some guys that might be dinged up, if that affects their availability to kind of condense their work into this next week, while Sherman's had a full basically 2 weeks to get ready. That might be something to watch as well, with Sherman going down to Frisco and playing in Toyota Stadium on Thursday night, 7 p.m. So pay attention to that. That is their last Thursday game. All the rest of them are on Fridays, so that's good. And so you get the couple Thursday ones out of the way, and then you can kind of get into a normal routine the rest of the season as you try to stay in the mix for a playoff spot. Going over to the Denison Yellow Jackets, 7-5A Division II. They have a bye this week. Everybody in the district has a bye this week. They are one of those teams that decided we want to have a 5-5 split, and instead of having most teams play your non-district games, then you have your bye, and then everybody plays in district. That would have meant having the bye after 3 games, and then everybody would have played the last 7 games. And they looked at that and said, well, why don't we just put everybody, since we have an even number of teams, let's just put the bye at the midpoint like everybody's used to. We'll play 5 games, then we'll play 5 games after the break to keep it, everybody's on a level playing field. If you have guys that are injured or banged up, you can use that wisely, and Denison's going to be one of those that we'll talk about them being able to take advantage of that. But they are coming into the bye off a 47-7 loss against Lovejoy. This was a game that was 40-0 at halftime. Lovejoy jumped out to a big lead in the first quarter, 27-0, and they were able to ride that obviously to the win. Denison avoids a shutout with Jalen Butler's 4-yard touchdown run in the final minute. And Denison's numbers weren't terrible from a yardage standpoint. They had close to 300 yards of offense. They had some drives. They put some drives together. Turnovers are what killed them in this game. They had 4 of them. They all came in Lovejoy territory. One of them was a fumble that was returned 52 yards for a touchdown in the first, literally on the last play of the first quarter as time ran out. That's one of those plays you look at that and you go, Denison's down 20-0. You're on Lovejoy's side of the field. You've just crossed midfield. You're about to make it 20-7, or you hope you're about to make it 20-7, and that happens, and then you're down 27-0. And so that was that game. Jack Allman led with 10 carries for 71 yards. Michael Kennedy had 5 catches for 49 yards. We had a quarterback change in this one. Corey Franklin got the start over Ty Rhodes, who was unavailable. And he had some good moments and some bad moments. Threw for 118 yards. Sacks hurt his rushing yardage. He had 18 carries for 34 yards, so that kind of tells you sort of how this game went from that standpoint. And like I said, there were times that, they would put together a pretty good drive, or they were starting in Lovejoy territory, and then the first play is a turnover. That sort of thing. They just could not really get anything going. And we talked about going into that game. Obviously, Lovejoy's really good, ranked in the top 10 in the state, and they proved why in the way that they were able to win this game. Obviously, I don't think anybody expects them or Melissa to lose before those two play each other at the end of the regular season to decide the district title for the second straight year. So Denison drops to 3-2 overall and 1-1 in district play. They are in the same spot. We talk about Sherman doing their outcomes have been the same so far. Denison's outcomes have been the same so far. They went 2-1 in the non-district. They beat the same opponents. They started 1-1 in district going into the bye. They beat Greenville like we talked about after the district opener, and then lost to Lovejoy. And so they are on their bye this week, and they have Terrell coming to town next week. And obviously that's a key game because last year Denison finished in 5th place and Terrell finished in 4th place. And if Denison had beaten Terrell, they would have gotten the final playoff spot. So right now they are in a 4-way tie with Princeton, Crandall, and Greenville for 3rd place. Terrell is 0-2, but as we'll probably talk about next week and will be mentioned in the story to preview that game, they have played Melissa and Lovejoy right off the bat. So last year that's what they did. They got those two out of the way, and they beat everybody else except for Crandall to get the final playoff spot. So if you're Denison, it probably is looking to be much of the same. You're going to have to beat either Terrell or Crandall, depending on which one you beat might determine if you go to the playoffs or not. And if you beat both, you'll probably get 3rd place because you should probably beat Princeton or Poteet in those other games. But it's going to be a key game for Denison. The bye is at a perfect time for them. They were without their leading receiver, Kyson Hussein, who was injured in the Greenville game. They thought there was a chance he might play last week, but he was unable to go. So he had technically I guess a leg injury. I don't know if necessarily a foot injury, but he was on crutches as a precaution on the sideline during the Greenville game, and they kind of thought maybe as the week went on he might be able to play. So he should definitely be back in time for Terrell, depending on how things go. And defensively, they were without Jacoby DeHorney. The edge rusher was unavailable for the Greenville game as well because he had an appendectomy that Monday, and I think they're shooting for him to be back for the Terrell game. And again, if this was the old schedule, if they were playing a game this week, I'm almost positive he wouldn't play just based on the recovery time after the surgery to be able to get out on the football field. But having the bye where it is for both of those guys, I think that's going to allow them to play. And at the very least, it means you miss one less game than you would have, even if you're not able to play against Terrell. It's better to only miss, maybe 2 games instead of 3, or 3 games instead of 4. Just get you back on the field as soon as possible. So Denison's going to regroup this week off the loss to Lovejoy. The one thing that Coach Whitson said after the game is they lost in a game like this last year, sort of a similar fashion, and they let that carry over through the bye and into the games coming up that will matter. Terrell, Princeton, Melissa, Crandall. The only game in that stretch, in the 5-game stretch that they won was the Princeton game. They lost to all the teams that finished in front of them, and I think in hindsight, looking back, the hangover of losing the game like they did against Lovejoy snowballed into Terrell, and then they were able to beat Princeton because Princeton wasn't very good, and right now they're 1-4. This year they were also 1-4, but they were 0-2 in district. They actually beat Mesquite Poteet, so they've done better in district already. And then you had to turn around and play Melissa and Crandall in those next 2 games after that. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Denison coming off their bye week and the loss to Lovejoy when they get ready for Terrell, which is going to be here. Which that's obviously one of those games. You want to win your games at home, so that'll be interesting to see what happens with them getting ready over the bye week. Another game that we have this week is Van Alstyne hosting Sanger in District 5 4A Division 2. That district kicked off last week, and Van Alstyne got the 26-14 victory against Crum. This was a game that was tight the whole way. Van Alstyne was down after the first quarter, 7-6. They're up 13-7 at halftime. It's 14-13 Crum in the third quarter, and then Van Alstyne gets the last 2 touchdowns to be able to win and get off to a good start in district. So they're 2-2, 1-0. And Sanger's going to come into this one 1-4, 0-1 after they lost 45-31 against Gainesville. In the victory over Crum, Weston Johnston had 20 carries for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was 10 of 21 passing for 142 yards and 2 touchdowns. Both of those went to Castafonseca, who was 3 catches for 42 yards. Brady Carson, 5 catches for 79 yards. Also had 6 carries for 42 yards. So over 120-ish, 130-ish yards from scrimmage on 11 touches. So that's a good night there. And the defense did a good job. Obviously you hold somebody to 2 touchdowns or less these days, you're doing a pretty good job. So a good start to district. For the Panthers. When you look at that district just in the early going, Aubrey also won its opener along with, like we mentioned, Gainesville beating Sanger. Farmersville has yet to play because they had the bye, and they were the only team. They're the only team that hasn't lost yet in district for the season. Everybody else, like we said in this district, coming into the district opener, everybody had a losing record except for Gainesville and Farmersville. And again, if you're following the path that you did last year to have the good season that Van Alstyne did, finishing as the runner-up in this district, this was a game that you won last year. It was a shootout, 52-35, and you've got to be in a mode to do what you did last year, get that win, because while you're playing, Aubrey and Gainesville are playing, so one of them's going to lose. So you're guaranteed if you win, there's only one other team potentially that could be with you atop the standings. Farmersville is going to play Bridgeport, and we'll see how that comes out as they kick off district play. But then also, leading into the next week, Van Alstyne's going to go on the road to Aubrey, and Gainesville's going to play Farmersville. So we'll know pretty quick in this district sort of how the pecking order is, and there's a chance by then, potentially, everybody will have a loss, just based on what people are predicting and that sort of thing. So just a kind of a gritty win for Van Alstyne to open district play, and I think maybe that's I don't know if that's the way they're living. We've talked about them the whole season. Just about all their games have been close, whether it's them having to hang on or trying to come back and beat some people. So maybe it's a good and a bad thing. Obviously you'd like to see them win a little more comfortably, but I think it's also a good sign that the moment's not too big for them in a lot of these games. Even if they lose, they've been able to keep games close. And obviously you're in a situation now where the games really mean something. So you put that in your pocket and you move on to the next one. You've got a home game against a team that you beat last year, and you hope it's not a close one, but you never know. And former Denison and Tioga coach Chad Rogers comes back into Grayson County. This is his first year over at Sanger, and so we'll see what he can do trying to hand the Panthers a loss, but should be an interesting game. That's the game I'm going to be at this week with Denison on a bye and Sherman playing on Thursday. Last year Sherman played on Friday, so I was able to do their game at home. But since there's only a handful of games, and this one's here this year, that's the game I'm going to go to. So I'm interested to see. I haven't seen Van Alstyne yet, and it'll be interesting to see what they can do as they host Sanger in 5-4A Division II action on Friday night. As we move down into the 3A ranks, we do have both of the teams in Division I who will be playing on Friday night, so we will be able to talk about them and getting ready for a game. And we'll start with the Whitesboro Bearcats in 4-3A Division I action as they host Boyd. Whitesboro opened district play last week 41-21 at Pilot Point. Getting back on track. We talked about they had They played they've played a pretty good non-district schedule, and dealing with a lot of the losses to graduation. How are they going to do? Getting into district play, picking up, I would say a comfortable win. They were up 28-14 at halftime, and they were able to extend that in the second half. Max Parker, 18 carries, 107 yards, 2 catches, 69 yards, and a touchdown. Carter Sluter, 6 carries, 59 yards, 2 touchdowns. Colt Fagan, 2 touchdowns on the ground. Clay Hermes, 139 yards passing, and a touchdown. And a really, really good defensive effort. Pilot Point did not have a lot of yardage. They did have a special teams touchdown. They had a kickoff return for a touchdown. So obviously that's not on the defense. And so that was one of the things we talked about defensively, was a lot of people were putting up a lot of points. Pilot Point had been struggling, so maybe that was a chance to right the ship. They did a really good job on that, really limiting Pilot Point in that regard. Now you're facing a team in Boyd who has not won a game, started district play against Brock. They were the unlucky ones there, and they lost 78-0. So Boyd has struggled. They've already lost as many games as they did last year. They have just it has not gone well. And we said, looking at Whitesboro's starting schedule to district play, there's 3 games there that if you're going to make the playoffs, you probably need to go 3-0. And it's before you get into that game against Brock. And they're in a spot where Pilot Point came in without a win. Boyd is coming in without a win. I would assume, but just looking at the schedule, because Peaster plays Brock, there's a chance that you're going to play 3 winless teams in a row, not just in district, overall, 3 winless teams on the season to start district play. And so you can't slip up against those teams. Lock in those 3. If you lock in those 3, you're basically in the playoffs, because 4 teams are going to go, and there's 7 teams in the district. So at worst, you've essentially locked up a playoff spot if you take care of those 3 teams right at the start, and then you get into seeding and working your way up. But it's worked out well schedule wise for Whitesboro. They took care of business. The win by 3 touchdowns against Pilot Point. Should be some of the same. You get a home game against Boyd, like we said, who has not looked very good. They've given up a ton of points. Blue Ridge scored 41 on them. Jacksboro scored 48 on them. Looking at some of the other games, I guess their low is 28 in the 5 games, but they gave up 38 against City View, and then obviously the 78 last week. So everybody is basically scoring in the 30s against them, if not more. And so if you're Whitesboro, you're feeling good. You're at home. You open district with a win against a team that you should probably have beaten, and now you got to do it again, and then you got to do it again next week, and you put yourself, like I said, you won't have clinched it, but you'll basically have locked in. All you need is the other games to be played, and you'll be in good shape. So Whitesboro is going to welcome Boyd in 4-3A Division I action on Friday. The other 3A Division I game or team is Pottsboro. They did not play last week. They had the bye because their district is a staggered bye system. So while everybody else in the district opened district play last week, Pottsboro did not play. So they come in at 4-0. They also are ranked this week, for those who care about such things. They moved up to number 10 in the statewide rankings in 3A Division I. So that's a nice feather in your cap if you like to have that. And they're going to go on the road to Mineola. And this is at 7 o'clock. So if you're going to make the long trip out to Mineola. It's a 7 o'clock kick and not 7:30. And Mineola is 2-3 overall, and they are 1-0 in district play as they beat Mount Vernon 42-27 in a I don't want to say shocker or ups. I mean, that's a score that a lot of people were like, oh, that's an interesting score, because I think a lot of people, I think I mentioned it on the podcast, we talked about in this district for the openers what the results might be, and I think everybody had Mount Vernon winning this game. Winsboro took care of Emory Reigns like we figured they would, and Commerce took care of Bonham like we thought that would go, and we thought Mount Vernon would be sitting here at 1-0, and they're not. And that sets up, obviously, the interesting matchup while Pottsboro is also playing. Commerce is playing Winsboro, so one of them is going to suffer their first district loss. I have no idea what to really think about this game. Now that Mineola has won, I obviously it's hard to keep track every week, especially for teams outside of the area when you're talking about injuries, when you're talking about teams getting better or figuring it out type of a thing. This was the game too that Mineola was down 27-21 in the middle of the third quarter. They held Mount Vernon scoreless the rest of the way, and then they scored 3 touchdowns to turn a 6-point deficit into that win. So obviously they're not worried about being down in a game. They're not worried about how much time is left, what the score is, all that sort of stuff. And obviously, like I said, I think they're obviously going to have a lot of confidence, because I'm sure they heard from a lot of people saying, oh, look at the guys you lost to graduation. They had some really talented athletes, had to move some guys to new positions because of that this year. And like I said, got off to the slow start, but like I said, the games in district are obviously the ones that matter. And if you go 0-5, but you go 5-0, a lot of people will not remember the 0-5, because the 5-0 is the most in district is the most important thing. So this is turned into a lot more of an interesting game. Obviously with Pottsboro, ground game has been the key for them. Major McBride has been the key for them. Going to be interesting to see. Obviously, what is the situation at quarterback? Perhaps the bye week came at the right time, as Pottsboro was dealing with some injuries. But this could be a really interesting game. I think all eyes are obviously going to be on Winsboro Commerce, just because of they're both 5-0. They both won their openers very convincingly. They both can put up points. Winsboro's defense has been a little bit better, but there's going to be a ton of athletes on the field. And so I think a lot of people are going to be looking at that for sure. But I think a lot of people are going to want to see with Mineola, was last week a fluke, or are they the real deal? And how does that change the projections in this district for everybody, and not just whatever Pottsboro has this week? So that's that, and of course you're going on the road. Those long trips to East Texas are not fun. So we'll see what happens with Pottsboro going to Mineola again, 7 o'clock start in 5-3A Division I action. So everybody else that we're going to talk about has a bye this week, at least in the 3A and the 2A ranks. We do have one more game, but it's obviously it's Texoma Christian being at 6-man and in taps. But everybody else played this week and is off this week. So we'll just kind of talk about what they did, and then what things potentially will look like in their districts going forward, and we'll just go down from district to district. And so we'll start with S&S, as they're going to be getting ready for 6-3A Division II action. They ended non-district play with a 28-3 loss against Howe. This was a defensive battle. At least you could say for the whole game, because 28-3 is not obviously a high-scoring affair, especially at halftime when it was 7-3. S&S got a Zane Dollar field goal in the first quarter, and then Howe scored a touchdown early in the second quarter, and that was the way it stood until the final 4 minutes of the third quarter. So defensive struggle there. before Howe was able to put together some drives and extend the lead, and SNS was not able to keep up. Hunter Corville had 9 carries for 35 yards. Also had 2 catches for 30 yards. Not a whole lot in terms of offense, which we've talked about with SNS. They've really struggled offensively. They've done actually a pretty decent job, on defense. But it just has not. It's been tough for them to get things going offensively, and that's obviously hurt them. You talk about the last 2 games, they've allowed a total of 35 points combined over their last 2 games, and that's really good. But the problem is they've only scored 9 points themselves, and so going into their district, we've talked about with them. It's a small district. It's only 6 teams. So if you beat 2 people, you can get in. And as Holiday is actually going to be playing this week, they have that weird thing on their schedule where they took the bye last week, and then everybody else takes the bye this week, just based on being able to try to find an opponent. So they're 3-1. So they'll either be 3-2 or 4-1 going into district play. But Callisburg's sitting at 3-2, City View's sitting at 3-2, Henrietta's at 2-2, and Valley View's at 1-4. And so again, SNS knows if you win 1 game, you're going to be in it till the end, and if you win 2 games, you probably can snag that last playoff spot. But it's going to come down to can they find a way to get some offense going against some of these teams. And I'll say this too, none of these teams offensively, especially towards the bottom in this district, they're not juggernauts. So you may not have to score a ton of points, but we talked about in the first game, SNS scored 20 points. That's kind of where they need to be. They scored 25 points, and then they scored 20 points after that. If they can get in the 20s, I think with the way their defense has been, they'll give themselves a chance. But it's gonna be tough for them to do that maybe in this district, just based on the situation last year. They didn't win a game in this district, so anything they do in the win column is improvement over last year. So we'll see how SNS does when they get into 6-3A Division II play next week, when we preview them taking on Callisburg, is who they're going to open up with. So they're going to get ready for them for next week. Moving over to 8-3A Division II. Obviously, we have 3 teams in that district. 2 of them are going to play to open district play, and I know everybody's super excited about that game, as well they probably should. But since we just talked about the SNS side of the Howe SNS game, we might as well finish that up and talk about Howe winning that game 28-3. They are on a little bit of a streak here. They were able to win a shoot. Howe season's been sort of all over the place. They win 2 weeks ago in an overtime shootout, 42-41, and then this week it's 7-3 at halftime, and they grind out a 28-3 win over the Rams. Doing it again on the ground, that's become their identity. We've talked about that. Knox Bounds, 18 carries, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Both of them came in the second quarter. In the final 4.5 minutes of the third quarter. The final 4.5 minutes of the third quarter, he scored both of his to turn that lead from 7-3 to 21-3. Braden Ulmer, 10 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown. Colin Murphy, 8 carries for 58 yards and a touchdown. Almost 300 yards rushing, only 14 passing. This is what you're going to get out of Howe, I think, the rest of the way. The ground and pound, run it 80-ish%, 85% of the time. Between the 3 or 4 guys that they have to win these games, kind of rely on some defense to make that stand up. Bad news for Howe. Cooper Jones comes back last week against Tioga. working his way back in, playing, doing a little bit of everything like he has done, and then it looks like he's not going to be able to play the rest of the season. I guess he got hurt in practice and leading up to this game, and it's a situation to where I don't think he's going to be able to be a football player anymore, which is a big blow for how obviously he was going to be the starting quarterback. He got hurt in the first game, and I think they were thinking, can we get him back at the very least in time for district at the latest and be able to get back to the playoffs. So they're going to have to do that without him. That's a huge loss. But the Bulldogs are showing they're adaptable. They're finding a way to win these games. They're winning them in different ways, which is a good sign. And so we'll see what they can do in this district. Again, it's a district where you have two very good programs that have been that way over the last several years in Gunner and Bells at the top. I don't think anybody is going to penetrate the top two spots. But then after that, I do think you have a situation where if you're Hal, Leonard, Lone Oak, and Blue Ridge, Lone Oak again maybe the worst of that four, but they won their first two games, so they've got some more confidence. They're obviously better than last year, so that might not be as easy a path as it had been. But I think if you're any of those other four teams, there's two spots, and I think everybody thinks they can get in. It's just going to be a question of what do they do against each other, and how is going to open up district play against Leonard. So right off and Blue Ridge is going to open against Lone Oak. So you've got those two games right off the bat are super huge to see kind of where it's going to start and who people need to beat after that. So like I said, a good end to non-district play for Howe. You won in two different ways, and that's a good sign. Whatever situation comes up in this district, because I think this district has a chance to get a little wacky. Like I said, outside of Gunner and Bells, in those top two spots, I think anybody could get third or fourth in this district. So we'll see what happens as Howe sits on their bye this week to get ready to open up district play next Friday. We'll talk about Bells. I guess we'll work our way through the box scores that I have. So Bells goes into district play at 4-0 after they beat Callisburg 49-22, and this was a game that was again typical Bells, up for 20. It was at 35-15 at halftime. They tacked on their last two touchdowns in the third quarter, so they were up 49-15 after three quarters. Ran for almost 400 yards. They completed one pass. It was a 61-yard touchdown, and that's Bells. That's what you're gonna get. And it was the same people doing the same things, led by Easton Helgren. 9 carries, 162 yards, 3 touchdowns rushing. He also had the 61-yard touchdown catch from Easton Branham. Bryson Thompson, 9 carries, 153 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Hayden Allen, 9 carries for 42 yards and a touchdown. He also ran in, I think, was 4 conversions? 3 conversions. So he had 3 2-point conversions as well. They held Callisburg, I thought, relatively well, forced a couple turnovers. I think Callisburg, we talked about getting ready for this game. They lost to Pottsboro in overtime. They played a really good schedule. One of these teams was going to lose and probably not feel bad about that. It's only going to make you better. But Bells comes in to district play at 4-0, and they're going to play Gunner. And so that's obviously the one that everyone's going to be watching, especially because, again, they're both, I would assume, unless something crazy happens in the rankings, which there shouldn't be, they're going to both come in ranked. They're both ranked this week, despite, there shouldn't be a whole lot of change. So it should probably be, number 1 versus number 9, maybe, somewhere in that neighborhood, depending on what happens. See if Bells moves up. I don't think Gunner's going to drop because they're not playing anybody. But obviously that's the big game right away to see how things go. It was only a 10-point game last year, and I know there's been changes for both teams, and Gunner looks like what Gunner normally looks like, and Bells looks like what Bells normally looks like. And so that's going to be a really fun game. It's at Gunner this year. I don't know how much of a difference that will make, but that's obviously going to be one of the games in 3A that everybody's going to be looking at when we get back to action. And again, this is one of those deals where the buys maybe at the perfect time for some people, and we'll see what happens in that key game. And the reason obviously it's a big game is because Gunner keeps rolling along. They won last week 49-7 over Gladewater. Again, a game where they were up 42-15 at halftime. They go up 49 to 49-15, 42 to nothing at halftime, and then Gladewater, their only points came off an interception return for a touchdown in the third quarter. I will say the fun note, you can have a fun note on something like that. That's the first interception that Gunner has thrown in 20 games. They went all last season without throwing a touchdown, without throwing an interception, and they got to game 5 before they threw the first interception this year. That's a crazy stat. I didn't go back and look to see how many attempts it was, but just the fact that you can go that long without throwing an interception is a crazy stat. And even with throwing the interception, they had 3 quarterbacks throw passes in this game, and that was one of 4 incompletions. They were 18 of 22 for 217 yards combined, and so there were only 3 other incompletions to go with that interception. But typical Gunner game, spreading out the wealth. Walker Overman, did have he was 8 of 10 passing for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for a touchdown. Didn't have huge rushing numbers like he has recently. He had 3 carries for 12 yards. Brock Body, 9 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown. Cannon Lemberg, 3 catches for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. Colson Wood, 3 catches for 36 yards. Jace Martin had a 30-yard run mixed in there. We talk about other guys that scored in this one. Hayden Farrell, Major Thornhill scored on the ground. Cole Harpole had a touchdown catch as well. Again, typical Gunner defense, forced 3 touchdowns. Gladewater didn't get to 130 yards of total offense, only had 7 first downs. They ran the ball 40 times for 106 yards. So, I mean, that's like 2.5 yards a carry, somewhere in that neighborhood. Like I said, it's typical Gunner game. So 5-0, rolling along. We talked last week about they came out of that Brock game banged up. Guys were injured. So it's going to be interesting to see again how they look going forward, because some of those guys are going to be out for a while, if not potentially the season. Just varying levels of injury coming out of that Brock game, and I don't think, obviously, this was not going to be a test. Gladewater, didn't look like they were going to do a whole heck of a lot in this game. But so Bells is obviously going to be a test. I think there's a chance, and I'm not taking anything away from Gunner's schedule, because obviously it's hard to find people to play. I would like to think, just look at how things have played out so far, that this Bells is the second best team that Gunner has played. I think everybody might agree on that. Obviously Prosper Grove, I know that was a 40-point win, and they're a first-year program, but they almost beat Salina, losing to them in overtime. They pushed Gilmer last week. They put up 62 points on Gilmer. Of course, Gilmer scored 82. But I think Bells might be the second. I'm almost positive Bells is going to be the second best team that Gunner's going to play. And so it's going to be interesting to see what Gunner looks like going forward because of those injuries, how that's going to affect things, and when they're in a game that they're not beating, they're not up 38-0 at halftime, they're not up 42-0 at halftime. What happens when they're, like I said, even the Brock game, as good as Brock is, and maybe it says, there are a lot of people that want to say this is the best Gunner team as part of this run, and that Brock result may be a testament to that in the long run when we're talking about things in December. But I'm really interested to see, obviously, like everybody, what Bell's at Gunner is going to look like in 2 weeks. But Gunner's just rolling along. I mean, when 35-12 against a ranked 3A Division I team is your worst win, because everything else is a blowout, a not even close blowout. When only one other team has been able to really play with you for a half, and that was the Walnut Grove game at half, and Gunner blew them out in the second half. You're doing something right, and you're just kind of steamrolling your way to what everybody expects is playing for a championship, or at the very least getting back to the semifinals, so we can do the whole Gunner Canadian thing for the umpteenth time in recent years. So that's going to be a great game to see what happens with that in 2 weeks. And so that's it for the 3A teams. Working our way down to the 2A teams, we are actually going to skip. No, I guess we don't need to skip because they don't have a game this week. So we'll work our way down. We'll do the 2A Division I teams. So we'll go to 6-2A Division I, and that's where obviously we find Tom Bean, Tioga, and Whitewright. We'll talk about the two teams that played this week, or this past week. They both came up short to end non-district play. Tom Bean lost to Leonard 39-20. Tried to make a little bit of a comeback after being down 26-0 at halftime. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. So Tom Bean's going to go into district play off the bye this week at 3-2, and they will open district play against Tioga next week. And like we said, they kind of got some things going in the second half. Bobby Rogers finishing with going 24 of 44 passing for 286 yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 2 touchdowns. The passing game was really how they moved things in this game. Tommy only had 58 yards on 30 carries. But like I said, Rogers had the 286 yards passing. Braylon Barrett, 9 catches for 158 yards. Brody Pearson, 4 catches for 60 yards on a touchdown. Garrett Kelly, 5 for 39. Ryan Dearmon had 2 for 28. So they were able to move the ball in the air. Unfortunately, so was Leonard. Leonard ended up throwing for 338 yards in this game, and that's how they got they got their first in going up 26-0 at halftime. They were able to all 4 of those were on touchdown passes. Obviously interesting with Tom Bean. We've talked about it. They're not eligible for the playoffs. They've already won more games than they did last year. They won 2 games last year. They've won 3 this year. Their scores are better against a lot of these people the couple people they did lose to. The scores were better. I feel like they're gonna shock somebody. I don't know who it's gonna be. I feel like they're gonna knock somebody off, and that's gonna be the difference in this district. And then the big thing is, can they continue to show that improvement? Can they knock off more than one person? And if they can, that sets them up really, really well for next year, because a lot of these guys are underclassmen. There's not a lot of seniors, and they will be eligible for the playoffs. We'll see what realignment does with them and everything. But obviously, when you went 2-8 and you're already 3-2, you're in a good spot. And so we'll just see if they can play spoiler, if they can continue to get better, build on that foundation of just showing improvement from year 1 to year 2 of a new coaching regime, and so far so good. And I think they're going to knock somebody off, and I wouldn't be surprised if they knock somebody else off. They could be sitting there. We could be talking about going 5-5, and if you do that and you talk about that progression of, okay, we won 2 games, we won 5 games. Now what's the baseline for what we can do with year 3 with a lot of these guys that are going to be 3-year starters as seniors, that sort of thing. So interesting to see what Tom Bean can do coming off the bye against Tioga. And I guess we could talk about Tioga since that's who is playing next. So Tioga didn't play this last week. For those who are loyal listeners to the podcast, we talked about it last week, that there was a chance when the podcast was recorded that that Tioga would find somebody to play, and they did not. They were supposed to play Detroit. Detroit canceled. So right now, it's not a forfeit yet. And the reason it's not a forfeit yet is because Tioga is trying to find somebody to play this week. Because obviously, they don't want to go 2 weeks without playing a game. Like we said, they lost that game to Howe on September 15th. You don't want to wait until October 6th to play your next game when you last played on September 15th. So I know Coach Birdwell thought he had somebody lined up last week, and unfortunately that team backed out on them after potentially trying to set that up. I know he's trying to find somebody this week. Unfortunately, I can't wait to see, because I think he could potentially wait till maybe sometime on Wednesday when the podcast comes out to try to get a game for Saturday, because he literally put out the call and said, we will play you Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, here, there, anywhere, don't care. They want to get a game in. So unfortunately, as of right now, the only thing I can say is they were supposed to play last week, like we talked about. Hopefully they can find somebody, but I don't know who that's going to be for sure, so we can't obviously talk about a game that we don't know is going to happen. But right now they're 2-2. I think that's obviously going to be the big thing. If they can't find a game, what does that look like after literally not playing for like 3 weeks? That would be my concern going into that opener against Tom Bean, that you've been off for that long. Hopefully they can. Now, if just for housekeeping clerical things, if Tioga does not find somebody this week, then the game last week goes down as a forfeit. So they'll be 3-2, but they won't have actually played on the field. The reason, if you're looking, and I'm sure people have heard it or seen it, technically right now it is a forfeit, but you can't have more than 10 games on your schedule, including a forfeit. Like the wins and losses have to add up to 10, because you're only allowed to play 10 games in a regular season. So that's the only reason there's been a hold off on putting that down officially, because if Tioga finds a game, it's basically like the Detroit game. They're just switching the bye in a game. So I've got to wait, and that will be reflected in this week's standings after the games Friday night if Tioga does not find an opponent. But I hope they do, and I hope they get to play. I think it's really bad. I don't say the word I want to use. Can't use on a podcast. I don't understand why somebody would cancel and hurt not only your opponent's chances to play a game, but also your own kids' chances to play a game. You're only guaranteed 10 of these. And as we've seen, unfortunately, with some teams, Bells is only going to play 9 games. Now, they have a totally different situation that involved a opponent dealing with a tragic accident literally the day before a game. You see stuff like that. Weather, some people weren't able to play that 1 week because of weather. It happens, and I feel like if you could play somebody, you should play somebody, because it's 10. You'd rather take away 10% of a season just to not lose, which I just don't understand. Nobody, like we said, nobody cares what your record is in non-district. Non-district is all about getting ready for district play. Those are the ones that really count. If you play somebody that you've already lost to, what does it matter if you lose to them again? So it was obviously very disheartening to see that happen for Tioga last week, and I can understand some frustration because obviously, like I said, you don't want to go 3 weeks without playing a game. So hopefully they can find somebody. And if they do, and you don't hear about it here, the reason is because it happened at the last minute or after the podcast had been recorded, so I didn't know that was happening. And the other 2A team in Division 1 is the White Red Tigers. They're coming off a 41-14 loss against Blue Ridge. Again, this was a game where they were down 28-0 at halftime. Put together some stuff in the second half, but obviously wasn't enough. Kenneth York, 21 carries, 77 yards, and a touchdown. Colt Yancey also had a touchdown run. Yancey was 11 of 18 passing for 111 yards. Ryan Parker, 3 catches for 29 yards. Gage Walker had a 26-yard catch. And so, much like we've talked about with SNS, White Red's been in that situation where they've had some trouble scoring points. So that's been sort of the up and down of a new offense under a new coach and trying to figure some things out. This was a playoff team last year. I would assume that they're spending their bye focused on a little more on offense to make sure that goes well. They open with Nakona in a couple weeks, and that'll be a key game right off the bat in that district. So, White Red's 2-3. They've and it's one of those things where both of the wins are close. They beat SNS in that 7-6 game that we talked about a couple weeks ago, and then they had opened the season with a good comeback win, 26-20 in overtime. But outside of that, it's been some tough sledding. They've been shut out a couple times, and so they're going to look to regroup over the bye week as well. And then the last 2A team, Collinsville, kicked. This is the weird quirk of the schedule. Collinsville started district play last week, but they have an odd number of teams, and it just so happens that when everybody else has the bye this week around Grayson, pretty much around Grayson County, Collinsville randomly has the bye in their district this week as well. But they're coming off a 63-21 victory over Lindsay. So they are 4-1 and 1-0 in district play. Again, the usual cast of characters doing things at Collinsville. Logan Jenkins, 21 of 28 for 368 yards with 6 touchdowns and a interception. And he also had a 75-yard punt return for a touchdown. Reed Patterson, 4 catches for 111 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he also returned a fumble for a touchdown. Colin Barnes, 4 catches for 91 yards. Lyndon Carpenter, 3 catches for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cash Morgan had a touchdown catch, 3 catches for 42 yards for him. Rylan Newman, 4 catches for 45 yards. And it was a typical Collinsville offensive performance there. Combined throwing for 401 yards, and they only ran 8 times for 35 yards, but they didn't really need to do a whole lot there. So they're 4-1, 1-0. Celeste and Munster also won their district openers, and Santo had the bye. So things are pretty sort of shaken out like they did early last year. And a big game on Friday is Santo Munster. Is what Collins is probably going to be watching about because those were the top 2 challengers to the Pirates last year. And Celeste is going to play Lindsay. And that was probably another one that the Collins is going to watch because they turn around when they come off their bye on October 6th. They're going to travel to Celeste. And that's going to be a super interesting one because depending on what Celeste does against Lindsay next week, so far in 5 games, Celeste has given up 37 points. They opened their season and they shut out Trenton. Then they played Whitewright and shut out Whitewright. And then they played then they played Wolf City and they lost that game 29-19 against Wolf City. And then last week they beat 2 weeks ago to close out non-district play, they beat Bowles 44-6, and then last week they beat Chico 49-2. Well, obviously it's a safety, so the defense really didn't have a whole lot to do with that one. So in all 4 of the victories, Celeste has allowed 8 total points in the 4 wins, and the loss they gave up 29 points. So Celeste Collinsville's base is two objects on a collision course. What's looked like a really great defense against obviously what Collinsville has done is a really great offense. That's going to be interesting to see what that looks like, especially after they play Lindsay as well. Celeste does next week. So Collinsville randomly has the bye with everybody else. So there's that. But they'll get back to work on October 6th like everybody else. And then the last game, real quick to talk about, Texoma Christian is opening TAPS Division III District 2 play. They are 3-2 after they lost last week against Forestburg, 39-0, and they're hosting Prestonwood North, and they come into the game at 4-1 after they won last week, 47-22. So 47-22, I think that's right. Yes, 47-22 against Cornerstone Christian. And so they're kicking off their district. Now, this is a smaller district. I guess we'll talk about the Forestburg game real quick. So in that game, real big struggle on the ground against Forestburg. Again, this was this is a regular UIL 6-man opponent. This is not a TAPS team. Braden Bryan had a catch for 33 yards. Nate Reed threw for 46 yards in this game. Nobody had positive yardage rushing the ball. So that's what we can say about Forestburg, Texoma Christian last week. So looking at this district, it is, like I mentioned, it's a small district. It's only got 5 teams in it. They did have a 6-team, but they dropped out before the season. And it should be an interesting and competitive district, at least for the top 4 spots, because you have Prestonwood, Azel Christian, and Nazarene Christian are all 4-1, and TCS is at 3-2. Bethesda Christian is 0-4, and their scores have not been real pretty. So I think there's 4 teams, and TAPS is wacky TAPS, with how they decide who makes the playoffs and who doesn't, and it's based on the size of your district and how many teams go, and it's just a weird deal. I think if they go by the original setup, I think the top 4 teams were going to go. So you had to finish in the top 4. Now that there's only 5, I don't think that's going to change, but I don't know. And I'm going to have to find out now that we're in district play to see where things stand. But I think it's obvious there are 4 teams that are in the mix, and I don't think Bethesda Christian is going to put up much of a fight in trying to make the playoffs. But who knows? Maybe they played 4 really good people to start off with, and they actually start off with the bye. They have, I want to say, the bye because they're playing a non-district opponent this week. But Azel Christian is going to play Nazarene Christian, and like we said, Prestonwood North is coming up here to play TCS. So that'll be an interesting situation. It's also interesting for Texoma Christian because they have a bye next week, while Nazarene and Azel Christian have the bye next week. Like I said, it's weird. I don't know how they put together these schedules, but they do. But once we get into October, we'll get to where everybody has a bye, and then some people will play all 4 of them. So we'll have the round robin scenario coming in. But it does seem like the winners this week will obviously have a leg up on the race for the district title. And, I don't say it's never too early to talk about seeding, just because we're in a situation where there's only 5 teams. So it's just weird. It's so weird. Like because of that other team dropping out, I think it was Granbury Cornerstone. I think that's who it was. that some people weren't able to replace games because obviously it's late in the season, so teams have double buys. It's just really weird. But again, in a smaller district, all it takes is one game, to keep you in the mix. And like I said, I don't know how much of a challenge Bethesda Christian is going to be just based on what they've done so far. So that's Texoma Christian kicking off their district play in their TAP 6-man district to open the season. To open district play on Friday night at home over at TCS. So that's a look at an abbreviated schedule this week, but a lot to recap because we had almost a full schedule last week. And then after this week, it's full go. Everyone we'll have everybody basically playing next week, and it'll be district, and everyone will be excited, and away we go. So again, thanks for listening to the podcast. Again, you can follow me on Twitter at Jason De La Rosa or the X, whatever X, what Twitter X, whatever you want to call it, at Jason De La Rosa. Follow us on the social media on Facebook. The Herald Democrat page. If you just want to follow, I post the stories on both sites just for people that don't follow our All-Texomaland page. So you can follow that one. You can follow the Herald Democrat one to see all the high school stuff, local stuff on there. So feel free to do that. If you're going to a game, enjoy that. If you're enjoying having a free Friday night to go do something else, have fun doing that. Always be safe. And we will catch you next time on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast.